Hello and welcome back to Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast with Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, where we sit down and invite some very special guests to talk about advertising, marketing, writing, everything to do with this crazy business of self-publishing. And today we are very excited to have a special guest, Erin Tolbert, who is an author personal assistant or an author virtual assistant. She is somebody who offers very, very, very important life-saving, I'm sure, to some authors' services to help them get their name and their voice out there. Erin, thank you very much for joining us. And how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we are very excited to talk to you. And as always, we have Craig Touch, an author himself and the founder of Hidden Gems Books. Craig, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Roland. And thanks for joining us, Erin. I've always used, when I was writing, I used assistants to help me. And when I started Hidden Gems, for a while I used my original assistant for a little while. It wasn't really that great. Then I tried to go on my own. And then I realized, there's just so much value in having some help. And I think, a lot of authors understand that value, but some authors sort of think that, they'll save a bit of money, do it all themselves. And that's fine for some authors. But I think there's what we want to do is sort of go through how, having an assistant often will help make you money because it'll save you time that you can spend writing more books, which will earn you more money than what you're spending to do some of the daily stuff that you do. And I know, like, personally, like, even with the help that I get, a lot of my time is spent doing other things that, answering emails, which is something I want to always do myself, and doing stuff like that. Right. But as an author, for me, it's different because I'm running a business now. And so that's an important part of my job. But as an author, writing is the main part of your job, and that's where you should really be focusing most of your time, right? So hopefully the idea here is to explain the whole process of what an author's assistant does and, the costs around it and how it would benefit authors for those that haven't really tried it. And since you're my assistant, I can testify to, your abilities. And I know you work with like a dozen other authors as well, and you were recommended to me by authors. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so I think one of the main things that author assistants can do is sort of simplify the have-tos that are part of your author business. So, as an author, I always say, don't sell yourself short. You're not just a writer, right? Like, it's a full business. There's marketing, there's tons of communications. You're hiring cover designers, you're hiring proofreaders, editors, all of those things. So it's really a lot. And by having an author assistant, sometimes you can sort of free up that headspace a little bit from keeping track of all those little things, because there's just so many pieces in motion at all times. And I'm sure both of you can attest to it. Creativity, you have to be in the right mindset, and you can't be having your head all over the place. So in a very general sense, that's kind of the goal of what an author assistant would do, would take some things off of your plate. And of course, there's a whole list of very specific tasks that they could help with. And I'd be happy to go into those, or however you want to do this.
Yeah, I think talking through some of those tasks will give authors a good idea of what exactly they can ask an author assistant to do. And of course, it's not limited to, a certain set of tasks. You can ask an author assistant to do anything, really. You probably don't want to ask them to write your book, but you can ask them to do most of the other things. So why don't you give us an idea?
I was going to say, actually, I don't have a personal assistant as an author. Maybe it's going to sound terrible. You could sell your services to me, as I'm an author. Craig will attest to the fact that I'm always all over the place, always got 6 million things going on, and he's trying to pin me down. How would you assist an author who's never had an assistant before?
Sure. So oftentimes the assignments that an author will hand over to their assistant are going to be fall into like one of a few different categories. So maybe it's something they just flat out don't enjoy doing. Like they are not interested in, designing social media graphics, for example. Or it could be something that they don't have the time to do. So, maybe you have a running to-do list and you keep finding that there's certain things that keep falling to the bottom of the list and you never quite get to them. Maybe those are things that you could pass off to an assistant, or maybe it's something that you really don't have the skill set for. Maybe book formatting is just not your thing and you want to pass that off. So those are kind of like the categories as far as things that you might hand off to an assistant. So what I always recommend somebody who is considering getting an assistant or hiring out help do is to write out a list of everything that you do, everything that has to be done as part of your author business. And then you can sort of look through that list and determine, okay, this is something I absolutely have to do or I love doing, so I'm not going to delegate that out. And sort of divide up that list on the things that are going to be for sure things that you would do, and then possibly things that you'd be open to delegating out. And from there, kind of look at your budget, decide like, okay, maybe I can hire an assistant for 3 hours a month or whatever it may be. And then look again at your list and decide, okay, these types of things perhaps could be done in that amount of time. And you'd be surprised how much someone who specializes in certain things can get done in a dedicated amount of time because they are focused solely on that task, right? So they're not also doing this, also doing that. And you want to keep in mind too, you're just paying them for what they're doing. So it's not like this is a salaried employee that is punching in at 8 o'clock and punching out at 5, and hopefully they're doing something all day. You're paying for very specific things to be done in a very specific amount of time. So some examples of things that are commonly asked of me as an author assistant would be like newsletter management. So regular newsletters, maybe setting up automations, those types of things. Social media management, and that can look very different depending on the client or the author. ARC team management, could be booking and tracking promotions, can be formatting books, uploading books, creating universal links, or like updating your back matter, which I think we all know is like a timely process that sometimes we don't give attention to. Maybe it's updating the author's website or their different online profiles, making sure that the presence is consistent everywhere. Corresponding with other freelancers. So maybe you're coordinating, as the author assistant, maybe you're coordinating delivery of the cover design, schedules for proofreading, editing, that kind of thing. Just general organization and data management, reaching out to reviewers. If you're doing translations, your assistant can manage that process, which can be pretty involved. Collaborations, it could possibly free up your time to spearhead like a box set collection with other authors, mailing out prizes. It's kind of an endless list of things. So really, whatever you can think of, it's probably possible to have some assistance with that.
If you're somebody with ADHD, you sound like a complete lifesaver because all of the different things going on, and it's like get one task focused and done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how much, when you actually start to list it out, how much you do as an author.
Yeah, and how much time that drains away from your writing, which is what is one of the only things that's really earning you money. All that other stuff is stuff you have to do, but it's not really earning you a lot of money. So sometimes you have to sort of look at what you think your time is worth and what it will cost you to hire somebody else to do, and then justify it that way. Or even if you know, a lot of times, you know, we look at things and we think, you know, I can do that. I don't need to hire somebody to do it, right? And you keep thinking that, but does it ever get done? You know, it probably. I have a lot of those tasks myself, where I'm just
Right.
like, yeah, I'll do that, but I don't. And they would be helpful to get done, and they would be
Yeah.
useful, and they might help me sell, you know, do whatever, you know. But you know, if we keep telling ourselves I can do it, you know, at some point you have to look at whether or not you will do it, and whether it's worth it to just have someone else do it.
Get out of my head, Craig.
Yeah, you won't have that nagging thought in the back of your head of like, okay, I'm doing this, but I should be doing this, and that type of thing. And also sometimes it's just nice to have somebody on your team. I've had clients over the years who've had things come up that they didn't expect, didn't plan for, and it was reassuring to them to know that I could keep things going in the background while they worked through whatever was going on outside of, you know, the writing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, for me personally, like, it's nice to be able to sometimes just shoot you an email and say, hey, can you do this or can you do that? And it's just something I thought of that I'm like, yeah, that should get done. I don't really have time to do it. Let's see if Erin can do it. And that will just take it off my plate. What are authors looking at in terms of costs? Like, are you charging or you know, you or other author assistants or assistants in general, are you charging task-based? Are you charging time-based? What are authors looking at in terms of, you know, how much things will cost, and some, maybe with some examples of how much time certain tasks might take on average?
Sure. Yeah. So I think for the most part, it's done on an hourly basis. There are certain tasks like book formatting, for example. I do that at like a project based rate just because that's what makes sense. But for most of your administrative data organization type tasks, we're looking at hourly. And in general, most of my clients will allot a certain amount of hours a month. So they might say, okay, you know, like I'm going to bring you on for 3 hours a month. And what I do in those 3 hours might change from month to month, depending on what projects they have going on. And perhaps during a launch month, like when their book is about to release, maybe those hours, they add a couple. So it really just kind of depends on how you want to budget that out. I do also have clients who don't have a set amount of hours that they hire me for, but they more or less say, okay, if it's getting close to this amount of hours, let me know, and then we'll evaluate. So kind of depends on how you look at your budget and that type of thing. As far as hourly costs, so author assistants, a little bit different than a general virtual assistant, because they're going to have the specialized skills for this industry. They're also likely to have a lot of the tools that are needed to do the job. So I keep going to book formatting, but I'm sorry. So book formatting. So the author assistant might already have a tool like Vellum. So that's going to save you money because you're not going to have to purchase that if it's not something that you already have. If they're doing your social media scheduling, maybe they're already paying for a scheduling tool. So you're not having to figure that into your costs because they're taking care of that. So with all that being said, you might see that an author assistant hourly rate is a little bit higher than a general VA who, you know, maybe assists realtors, lawyers, authors, whatever, you know, that broader range. So I would say from what I'm seeing lately, I'm seeing between like a $25 to $65 an hour range for author assistants at this time.
Right. And I mean, that's a good point, right? There's a lot of, aside from the idea of how much how much is your time worth, and then figuring that out in terms of like applying that to writing, there's these hidden sort of fixed costs that people don't think about. In terms of the savings that you get by your author assistant, like you said, having already purchased their licenses for Vellum or for Photoshop or for anything that, you know, all these things cost money, right? And if you haven't already spent that money, that's a savings right there that you're getting by hiring somebody. Not to mention the fact that all of these tools have learning curves, and those learning curves can be quite steep, right? And so then you have all the time invested in learning those tools. So that's another savings where you don't have to do that. And a lot of times it's just not interesting to you, or you don't have, even if you knew how to, like, I know sort of how to use Photoshop. That doesn't make me a good cover designer, right? So
Right.
you have to understand cover design, and not that, you know, you're necessarily going to use your author assistant to design your covers, but even in terms of making ads or doing other sort of graphics, they have those skills, or you can find ones that have those skills, and that's a savings right there. Yeah.
Yeah. What is that old saying? If you think hiring a professional is expensive, try hiring an amateur.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, obviously those with the higher hourly rates, it's pretty safe to assume, I mean, you should always vet, but it's pretty safe to assume they're going to be pretty experienced in that area. They're going to be working efficiently. So what maybe might take you, if it's something you don't do regularly, maybe it takes you 2 hours and it only takes your assistant an hour and 15 minutes or things like that, you know? So it really doesn't have to be expensive to bring on help. You know, if, like I said, you can set a budget of $50 an hour, and however many hours that equates to for the assistant that you decide to bring on, I promise you'll be surprised how much gets done in that time, and how your to-do list starts getting like checked off, and it feels really good.
Yeah, for sure. And so for people that are looking to hire one, what are some of the questions that they should ask of their potential author assistants? How should they vet them? Where can they find them? You know, all that sort of stuff.
Right. So word of mouth is going to be your best bet, of course. If you are connected with other authors, I always recommend chatting with them, seeing who they recommend to start, or if you're part of a Facebook group, writers group, those kinds of things. That's where I would recommend starting. Almost all of my clients have come to me word of mouth. If that doesn't work out for you, you could post on social media. Depending on your social media presence, you might already have some assistants who are actually following you. And if they see like that you're looking for somebody, that could be interesting to them, and maybe there's a good fit there. And of course, there's places like Reedsy, Upwork, those kinds of things. I would just caution that vetting there is even more critical. But even with word of mouth referrals and stuff, you're still going to want to vet. You're still going to want to get other references and those kinds of things. So those are sort of where you could find candidates. And then as far as, you know, speaking with the candidates and deciding what questions to ask them, you're going to want to find out about availability, of course. So maybe they're in a different time zone. Is that going to be a factor for you or not? That's something for you to decide. Are there days or hours that they don't work? Again, see how that fits into your business. You want to talk with them about their communication preferences. So are they going to want to communicate with you via email only? Are they someone who's okay with hopping on the phone and chatting with you every now and again, doing a Zoom? Whatever is comfortable for you, is it comfortable for them? So you want to make sure that the communication is really good between the two of you, because it is a partnership in that way. And of course, the financials. So what are their rates? How do they invoice? When do they invoice? Those kinds of things. I think it's important to ask them if they have experience with certain tools. So if you are hiring them to help you with your social media, for example, do they have experience with XYZ platform? If you have a preferred platform, do they have experience with that? If you're not sure which platform you want to use, ask them what they like. What are their recommendations? This is the world that they live and breathe. So most likely they're going to be able to say what has worked well for them or has worked well for other clients. You can ask them, and you might already know this before you start talking to them based on their website or what you've heard word of mouth. But if there's an area or even a genre that they specialize in, so some assistants might really focus on romance, like contemporary romance. And if you're a cozy mystery author and you're looking to have your assistant help with things like marketing and reaching out to bloggers, maybe you want to look for someone who's a little bit more familiar with your genre. And that's, it doesn't have to be that way, but it's just something to consider. I've always liked when clients have reached, or potential clients have reached out to me, and they sort of have an idea of how many hours they can allot, and they have this big long list of things, and they will often ask me what I actually enjoy doing, because it makes the most sense to have me do something that I like doing and they need done anyway. On the flip side of that, you might want to ask if there's any tasks that they are unwilling to do. So maybe they don't want to or are unable to upload books to certain platforms. Maybe they are not interested in doing piracy checks, or those are just, a couple examples, but it's good to have a sense of what they can and will do as you figure out if this is going to be a good partnership or not. Then, you can ask very specific questions, even like, how are you going to keep my passwords and other confidential information safe, right? Because you're sharing quite a lot with this person that you've probably never met, and that can be a scary thing. And I would say that a lot of authors have not gone through the process of hiring somebody, or interviewing somebody. This is new to them. So don't be afraid to ask questions, reach out to other authors who've gone through this and kind of see what they recommend.
Yeah, no, those were great points. I know when I originally hired my assistant when I was writing, it was, this was back in, 2015 maybe. And it was definitely a different landscape. Things were a lot newer than they are now. And there was no author assistant. It was just VAs and PAs. And I ended up finding somebody who was living in Thailand, and it was cheap, but she wasn't an expert on author stuff, and so there was a lot of learning curve, which meant spending time getting her up to speed on stuff, which because of the price, it was still a good deal, but it was eventually it sort of hit that wall where it was maybe not as effective as if I had somebody who was an expert in that stuff. So I would definitely do things differently now. And based on what you're saying, a lot of that stuff makes sense, right? All those questions are not things that I ever thought to ask at the time. And I think, it probably wasn't, I probably wouldn't had a hard time finding somebody who had a lot of that expertise anyways, because the people that did were probably writers themselves figuring it all out too. But yeah, no, absolutely. Those are really good points. And, I think too, you touched on a couple things that, one of the things, password management, that's interesting. It's always surprised me with the way that the world works now with all of the social media stuff and the people that do it professionally versus, not professional social, well, there are professional social media people, but the people that, have businesses and that have, or that have personalities and they have their social media. And of course, it's very important to be yourself on social media. And we recently posted a blog about that. And I am a believer in that. But at the same time, there's ways to have somebody manage that and still keep it personal. And we can talk about that too. But it always surprises me that there isn't a better password delegation management into a lot of these sites where you can say, look, I don't want to give my password to somebody else, but you as a company should recognize that people need other people to help them. And so there should be a way for these people to allow someone to log in. And very few sites do allow that. And so it means that you kind of have to hand over your password to somebody. So how do you sort of manage that? Is there tools? I don't know even how it's done.
Yeah, right. So definitely love those rare sites that have admin access where you can add an additional user or whatever. So maybe like WordPress, ConvertKit, BookFunnel does the awesome. You can get your own
Facebook.
login.
I think you can have people help manage your campaigns. Yep.
Exactly. So those awesome, easy. For all the other places, it's really a very personal decision based on what you're comfortable with and things like that. There is a tool or system called LastPass that I use with a lot of my clients, where essentially they share their login with me through LastPass, but I never actually see what the password is. So it's sort of like I don't know. I don't really know how it works, honestly. It just works. They share it with me and it takes me to that site, say Amazon or whatever it may be, and it logs me in. And they didn't have to give me any of their personal information. So we use that a lot and it works well. I've rarely had issues where it hasn't worked. So definitely something I would recommend that people consider using.
That's good. I've never even heard of that. So does it work with all the social media? You can log into Twitter and Instagram and Amazon, obviously, and others. And you just, so I guess you have your own account. They have their account. They say this person's allowed to log into these sites, and then you sort of go in and say, I want to log in as this person to the site, and then it just logs you in, and that's it. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As far as the sites that you listed, I believe so. Like I haven't had any sites that it hasn't worked with. I use it with even things as simple as like books to read. I used it with Amazon, Scribe Count, like all of those things and tools that authors might use. And yeah, they share it with you, and it's sort of like in a folder that says what the site is, and you can click take me to that site or whatever the verbiage is, and it takes you there and you're in.
And so do you stay logged in then or does it time you out after a certain amount of time? Or
I'm in the habit of I log out when I'm done, just because like the last thing I want to do is order dog food under a client's account on Amazon or something. So I'm in the habit of immediately logging out when I'm done with the task, so I can't say for certain.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's definitely better than what I generally do, which is like best practice obviously would be to change your password to something, and definitely not something that you're sharing like that you're using on other sites, right? And then you give that password to the person, and then at least and then if you stop your relationship with that person, then you change the password back. But of course, that's not as secure and safe as that site. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, cool. So I think too, back to the social media stuff. So that was one of the things, I was interested in talking to you about, because that is something that, I have you help me with. And I think I've heard from a lot of authors too, that, the whole social media stuff, it's daunting and it takes a lot of time. And, in my personal life, I basically don't use social media. I just find it's just so draining, and there's just so, you can just lose so much time in it. And, but for the purposes of an author and having a relationship with your readers, which is crucial to building your pen name and your brand and all that, it's important to not ignore it. And for businesses, you can't really ignore it. So, a lot of authors do turn to assistants to help with that. And then, there's the people that, you were actually, telling me about sort of how you sort of bucket authors into sort of 3 different categories, and of how they manage their social media, and then how they would then use your help for that social media. So, maybe go through some of that, and that'll help authors that are listening to this figuring out like whether that's something that you can help with and how it applies to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first and foremost, everybody's relationship with social media is different. So you kind of need to reflect and think about what your relationship is with social media. Is it a place for you that you enjoy being? You like interacting? It's, you're able to set boundaries as far as time. You don't lose your whole day to cat videos or something, or are you a person who gets on there and, like you were saying, Craig, like feels drained, like the creative suck or what, or maybe it's a technological thing. Like maybe it's just, you're not savvy in that way. So I would say, for the author who just really doesn't like social media much, like doesn't feel comfortable there or has a hard time setting boundaries with their time there, an assistant could help with them in the way of kind of curating the content, with help from the author. So that's where like that relationship of getting to know your client and the author assistant relationship comes into play, because you do want to keep what you put on social media personal and not just sale, like that kind of thing. So you can work together to create the content that is authentic and valuable to the readers. And maybe your assistant then takes care of all the posting. Like even just having them post the stuff is going to save you time. I've also done for clients where I've monitored the comments and things like that, and the questions that need to be answered by the author, I just alert them to it, send them the link, like, here's this. So they're not spending their whole day like monitoring and scrolling for every little thing. I'm pointing it out to them, like, hey, you need to respond to this, or, oh, I think you'd like to see this, that kind of thing. For clients who don't mind being on social media, and they're comfortable coming up with their own, personal messaging, and like they talk freely about what they're doing in their day, or like want to share some progress about a work in progress. Maybe they pop on and do all of that kind of posting and have their assistant do the promotional posts. So it's kind of a collaborative effort in that way. If you're an author who is super savvy with social media and enjoys it, then by all means do it. And maybe you can utilize your assistant in a way to just sort of look up and study current best practices, trends, looking up hashtags. I mean, there's lots of different ways that they can supplement and help. And every little bit of time that they can save can free up your time to do the writing.
I mean, social media is such an interesting thing, because I know a lot of authors, they're like, I know I need to be on social media, but what do I post? And I find I write under a pen name and I write under my own name. And under my own name, it's easy. I just treat my business account like my personal account, and then sometimes pitch my books. But for my pen name, it is this weird disconnect, because, I have an audience and they respond to the posts that I make, but I don't want to pretend to be somebody else. So I've always found it kind of difficult. And what do you bring to sort of social media in terms of your experience helping authors express themselves through social media?
Right. So it can be a little bit of trial and error at first. You have to experiment and sort of see what sticks or resonates with your audience, and what type of posts spark interest for them. In general, you want to have there be some type of call to action, right? Like not necessarily go buy my book, but respond, comment on this post, or engage with the post, give it a like, give it a heart. So I think just keeping that in mind when you're posting something, that you're looking for a reaction. I know that sounds kind of like superficial, but like that's what we're looking for with the social media. Will help you sort of figure out what what to post. And, within a short amount of time, as you experiment with different types of posts, you'll get a sense of what your audience likes. If they like to talk about your work in progress, or if they prefer to talk about, like more stuff about your author life, like the behind the scenes of the writing and that type of stuff. Depending on how much you want to share, about your personal life, you can talk about your pets, or, like places that you like to write, those kinds of things. Like there's easy ways to make it personal. And another thing that readers generally like to do is they like to talk about themselves as well. So asking questions where they can tell you about themselves or things that they like, those posts are usually a hit. Like people love to talk about themselves.
Right. I mean, social media is supposed to be an interactive sort of thing. And so that totally makes sense. And I think, the idea of sort of the hybrid approach of, an author writing some of the stuff themselves that's more personal, and then asking you to do some of the more rote, kind of typical, more salesy ones, or the ones that they are not maybe as personal, but they think of ahead of time. And I think the idea of getting you, even if you want to write the personal stuff, but where you're saying about posting it, having you post it, I think the important thing there is, like, at one point, if you're not super familiar with social media, when you hear that, you might think, well, if I already know what I'm going to say, then I'll just post it myself. Why would I give it to you? But I can say, like, that's not as easy as it sounds, because, depending on the platform, like I can spend half an hour coming up with a tweet, even though I know what I want to tweet about. It's just like, I got to fit it into the time, into the space that I can put a tweet in. I got to find all the hashtags that, I want to use. I got to put the link, I got to do all that stuff. And I could have just passed it off and said, here, tweet about this. Here's the key things to mention, find some good hashtags for it. Like, and that's, to me, that's a big time saver. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up the personal touch. It's just, you don't have to spend your time figuring that out, and you can probably do it, much faster than I can. You probably already have, your assistant probably already has a lot of that information, knows what a lot of the good hashtags are, and knows what's the best way to do it. Right. So I totally see the value in that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And it really is something that you don't, like you said, how to do it. It's not that you don't know how to do it. You're capable of doing it. But for many people, and this happens in your personal life too, when you get on social media, all of a sudden you're on there and you're like, wait, what was I doing? Like, why am I here? You're looking at different things, and you're getting pulled into different discussions or topics. And it can be really hard to manage your time on social media. And that is something that an assistant could help with if you struggle in that area.
It strikes me that you could probably, we could probably have another hour of discussion about all of the things that you've done for authors on social media that have worked. I mean, what you just said about, getting an audience to speak about themselves, that's great. I was in my head, I was like, that's a fantastic idea for a post I could do on my account. So I think there's a lot of value there. I wrote a blog that Craig discussed earlier on, like, being yourself authentically on social media. And it seems almost contradictory to hire an assistant to do that, but in some ways, I guess you can help an author find parts of themselves to put out on social media that resonate with other people, like you discussed.
Yeah, I really think so, like in a collaborative way. So it's kind of like you can sort of brainstorm together and, like you said, help the author find their voice for that space.
Yeah, for sure. That was one of the things that we said in that post is how important it is to be yourself. And I wanted to make sure that people understood that it's not a contradictory idea of being yourself, yet having someone else do the social for you, because it's you still can be yourself, but you're taking away the time drain that it is to go out and be yourself on 5 different social sites and format it for those social sites and figure out how you can add your links and your hashtags and your images and your blah 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 blah, and it just takes forever. And you can have someone else do that and still be personal and have a connection to your readers. It doesn't mean that I'm just only now posting about my books. I can tell you that here's the story I want you to tell because this just happened to me, and then you can put it on those format it for those different sites and add it and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's actually going to be 30 minutes of Erin time. Be authentic as an author for 30 minutes with Erin, and then you can be authentic for 30 minutes per day using that.
Yeah, and going back to how your relationship with an assistant can sort of evolve and change month to month. Maybe at the beginning of your relationship, it's heavy on the social media while you're sort of learning what works for you. And then you might have the confidence and the efficiency to do it yourself, later on. And now your assistant can take care of your newsletter because you've kind of gotten better at that skill and comfortable with it. So I think it's important to remember that the relationship can really evolve. And just because your assistant is doing newsletter management for you 1 month doesn't mean that that's the only thing that they can be doing for you 8 months down the road. That can really change as your needs change and, as the market changes as well.
Well, and it's also the time savings for the future when you do things like you mentioned before. What you do, one of the things you do is setting up newsletter automation, right? If you set that up one time, then or you set up a process, or you make a process simpler that an author maybe doesn't know how to simplify themselves. So they're spending X amount of time every week doing this certain thing, and you can come in as an expert in doing that sort of thing and show them how to do it more efficiently. And then sure, they're paying for that sort of upfront cost, but then going forward, maybe they won't need you for that task anymore because you've made it very simple and automated it, so that going forward they can maintain it and it doesn't cost them as an ongoing thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think you hit the nail on the head with simplifying. So streamlining your processes. What's the idea of like working smarter, not harder kind of thing? I know one of the things that I personally enjoy a lot as an assistant is the organizational aspect. So I really like to help an author kind of get organized so that everything they do can run more efficiently. So instead of, we're uploading books and, I have to go over here for Dropbox, but wait, that's not the current file. We have to look here, and my blurb is kept here, and this, you know what I mean? Like, when things are all over the place, it takes more of your time and energy. And if your assistant can help you organize like a system to keep track of everything, that's really valuable throughout the course of your career.
Yeah, I think that you're giving me ideas about things I'm going to have to talk to you about after this call.
I was going to say, so Craig, what are the things that Erin has been able to lift off your shoulders if you feel?
Oh, I mean, she helps me with the social, because like I said, I don't get that stuff. I mean, I get it, but I'm not into it. It's not my thing. And so I'm happy to have her help with that. And we have the more reader focused blogs. She does the author interviews for us that we post every other week. And the list blogs that we have about some of the arcs that we feature on the site. I like to put together, every other week a list blog to help readers find new books in various genres and stuff. So she does that. So there's all sorts of that stuff. And then every once in a while, I'll just shoot her an email and I'll be like, hey, have you ever done this? Do you know how to do this? Can you reach out to some Facebook groups and see if you can find, whatever. So there's that sort of aspect where, from working with me, Roland, you know very well my ADD mind and how every day I'll be like, hey, we should try doing this and we should do this. And then I'm like, why don't we do this? And it's like, yeah, I just come up with a new idea and decided we should act on it right away, and it's sometimes helpful to have an assistant who I can sort of have it investigate, even if that's possible to do or whatever, right?
Right.
And things like the
right hand.
Yeah.
I was going to say things like the list blog posts, they're prescriptive. And if you're a rational human being, you should be able to do them fairly quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
But if you're not a rational human being, like they can take hours to do something that should just take minutes. And I can imagine that being a complete lifesaver. We are approaching the top of the hour. So, Erin, thank you so much for all of the stuff you've been sharing us. I was going to say, if there's anything you'd like to share with our listeners about, if they want to get in touch with a personal assistant or anything like that, then feel free to give us your pitch right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have a website and you're welcome to visit it. It's etolbert.com. And actually, I do have a sheet that you can download there that has a list of 10 questions to ask an author assistant before hiring. And it also lists some tools that work really well for collaborating. So anyone can go there and just download that for free. If you were driving or on a walk or something during this podcast, you can just print off that list of questions to ask. But yeah, anyone, if they want to reach out and ask me questions, I'm happy to answer questions or point people in the right direction, connect them with resources that could be helpful for them.
That's wonderful. And Craig, any final thoughts?
Well, listen, I would absolutely recommend Erin for any authors that need an author assistant. But at the same time, just remember that an author assistant, and we didn't really touch on this, but they have a limited amount of time. I know Erin only takes on a certain amount of clients so that she can give everybody the time that they need, and so that she can work a sane amount of hours herself. And so if, there's lots of author assistants out there, but if you want Erin, I would say contact her right away before anyone else does, because she'll get booked up.
Oh,
you're like, too late, guys.
Thank you for the plug.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin. And everybody, I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Fully Booked. We'll be back very soon with another episode next week. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please subscribe, click that like button, leave us a review if you're listening on a podcast station, give us a comment. We really appreciate you listening and sharing and all of the support we've been getting for doing Fully Booked. Thank you very much. And we'll be back next week with more exciting stuff.